Hello class. Today we're going to do something called the fraction to decimal lab. Okay, so let's dive off into that. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be looking at 41, and specifically 41 fraction to decimal equivalents. Now in the activity that you're going to do, you're going to have far more than just 41 fractions to decimals to complete today, but 41 of the ones that you're going to be looking at will be a set of fraction to decimal equivalents that I want you to memorize. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be converting fractions to decimals so that we can begin memorizing 41 specific fraction to decimal equivalents. The reason why I need you to memorize them is because it's going to help you out later on in math, whether it be in algebra, geometry, algebra 2, calculus. It's just good practice to have some of these memorized because it makes things faster when you're dealing with math later on. So, first question I have for you then is, how do I change a fraction to a decimal? Well, as you see on this page, all you have to do is divide the numerator by the denominator. In other words, divide top by bottom. Now, when you look at this box down here, this box right here, there's really nothing underneath it. In the lesson that we're doing in class today, this box actually covers up that information right there. So when you see the boxes today, just disregard them. There is nothing underneath them. So how do we change a fraction to a decimal? You just divide the numerator by the denominator. Now, when you do that, you're going to get two types of decimals. One type of decimal that you'll get is something called a terminating decimal. This is a decimal that stops. And here are some examples of that. 0.25 doesn't go any further. 15.487 doesn't go any further. 3.5. Those are all what we call terminating decimals because they terminate. Or another word for terminate is they stop. Okay, so with that in mind then, what's the other type of decimal that we could have? Well, we could have repeating decimals. Now, a repeating decimal, it says that it's going to repeat a single digit or series of digits. Okay, now the way we write a repeating decimal is, or the way we represent it is with a bar over the particular thing that's going to repeat. So in this first example, we've got 0.7 with a bar on the 7. So on the calculator, what you would get then is 0.77777, and you just keep going. Now, on most calculators, when you actually do that, it's actually going to give you 0.777777778, and there's going to be an 8 at the end of that. Well, basically what that does is the calculator is looking at the last digit that it can display on the screen. And it uses rounding rules to calculate that last digit. So when you see 0.7777777 and it just looks like that 7 is going to keep going, but there's an 8 at the end, that's what we call a calculator rounding error. Okay, so it does take that digit that's going to be just off the screen, and it uses it to determine the rounding for the very last digit. So you've got to be smart enough to realize that that 8 is a calculator rounding error, and that if you get those 7s going all the way across the screen like that, then that means you write it as 0.7 with a bar. Now, the second one, whenever we look at it, okay, it gives you 15.45, and the bar is just over the 5. So that means it's going to be 0.4, and then that 5 is what keeps going. Now again, on this particular one, at the end of the calculator, you would see 6, okay? Because again, that previous digit's a 5, and it's going to round that last digit on the calculator. Okay, so that's what that one is. Now this last one is one of my favorite, 3.142857. So what that is 3.142857, and then it begins again, 142857, and so on and so forth. But you have to be able to recognize what's repeating. Okay, so this is actually the decimal equivalent to 1/7, which is one of the ones that I'm going to have you memorize. It's going to be a great thing. Okay, so the two types of decimals that we're going to deal with: terminating decimals, decimals that stop, and repeating decimals, decimals that either a single digit repeats or a series of digits repeat. And the way we represent that repeating decimal is by placing a bar over the number that repeats. Now, one of the things that you have learned in the past that I need to make sure that I correct is that you only write the thing that repeats one time. So if I gave you the fraction 1/3, Okay, and when you type that in on the calculator, it gives you 0.3333333, and so on and so forth. There have been several people over the past several years that they said that you'd write that 3 times and put a bar over the last one. No, that is not correct. Some people have said, oh, you write it 2 times and put a bar over the last one. No, that is not correct either. You take the thing that repeats, you write it 1 time and you put a bar over that. Okay, and that's how you write a repeating decimal. Okay, so we got to remember that. Make sure that is correct. Now, so let's see if we can practice this. Okay, so if you're going to do this particular lab, okay, you're going to take a calculator. So you get a calculator out. So let me get mine out real quick. Here's my calculator. Let me clear off what's there. And what you're going to do in this particular thing, if I want to change 3/4 into a fraction, okay, all you're going to do is 3 divided by 4 and hit the enter key. And then you would write down exactly what the calculator gives you. Okay, and that's what I'm going to want you to do on this lab today. Write down exactly what the calculator gives you. Okay, so this next one, it says 1/3. So you're going to do 1 divided by 3. Oh, and look at there. Okay, notice. Okay, now if you recognize that it's a repeating decimal, you can write it using correct notation. So this one is 0.3. Okay, and I recognize the 3 repeats, so I'd put a bar on the top of it. Okay, next one, 2 divided by 11. Oh, look at that one. Okay, what do you notice about that one? 0.1818181818. Okay, do you notice a series of digits repeating? Okay, so this one is 0.18. So I write the thing that repeats 1 time, and I put a bar over both of those numbers because that entire 18 repeats. Okay, now I told you that 1/7 was really kind of cool. Okay, so let's look at that one. So if I do 1 divided by 7, notice it gives you 0.142857142.9. Well, if you cannot tell that that's repeating, then I want you to write the entire thing down. Okay, but if you'll notice here, 1428557, and then what does it start doing? 142, well, why is there a 9 there? Oh my goodness. Well, I told you it gives you a calculator rounding error. That 9 really should be an 8 because 1428, here's the number, but what's the number right after it? The 5, and what's that going to do for rounding? It's going to bump it up 1. So that's where the 9 comes from. Okay, so that's what we're looking at today. So that's what I'm going to have you do. Okay, is I'm going to have you type in just a bunch of fractions, and I want you to give me their decimal equivalents. So here's the lab that you're going to be working on. Okay, so on Google Classroom there, you're going to either write down the fractions or you're going to print this document out. And I want you to just type them into the calculator. So you'll start there with 1/2. 1 divided by 2, write it down, 0.5. 1 divided by 3, write it down, 0.3 with a bar. 1 divided by 4, 0.25, and so on and so forth. But what I want you to do as you're doing this is I want you to look at patterns. Okay, so if you'll notice in this first one, we got 1/2, but then we got 1/20th, 1/200th, 1/2000th. So what happens there when I add a decimal to the denominator? I want you to try to tell me what happens with the decimal value. Okay, does it change? What's going to happen with it? Here you got 1/3 and 1/30th. Again, I added that 0 to the end of that denominator. What's that going to do to my decimal value? So I want you to kind of notice some things that are going on with this. 1/4, 1/40th, 3/4, 3/400ths. Okay, so what are some of those things that we're going to be looking at? What are some of those patterns? That's what I want you to try to determine, okay? And then I want you to write them down. Okay, so either on another sheet of paper, on the back of the document that you're printing, I would like for you to write out some of the patterns that you happen to see. Okay, and then there's some things about what we call fraction families. Like what happens to a fraction family if you've got like 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5. That's a fraction family. Okay, and the reason why we say they're a family is because we're using the same denominator. Okay, what happens with that decimal? Is there a pattern that I can use to help me memorize those? Because that family right there of the fifths, that's one of the ones you're going to have to memorize. Okay, or 1/6 and 5/6, that's a fraction family. And some of you may say, well, what happened to 2/6 and 3/6 and 4/6? Well, they simplify to other fractions. 2/6 simplifies to 1/3. Okay, 3/6 simplifies to 1/2. 4/6 simplifies to 2/3. Okay, so some of them will simplify, but they're still all part of that same fraction family. Here's the seventh, 1 7, 2 7, 3 7, 4 7, 5 7, 6 sevenths. So what happens with those? Okay, and then what we're going to end up doing tomorrow is we're going to look at a series of 41 of these, once we're processing this lab, that I'm going to have you memorize. And that's going to be this list right here. These are all the ones that I'm going to want you to memorize, and I'm going to give you about 2 weeks to memorize them before I give you a quiz on them. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking towards. Okay, so that's what I want you to do today. I want you to take your calculator, whether that be on the computer, whether that be on your phone or whatever, and you're going to type each of these fractions in, and I want you to give me their decimal equivalent. And then make a list of any patterns that you might see. Okay, so until tomorrow, I'll talk to you later.